Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning to those of you online, and good morning to everyone here in the room. My name is Catherine Atmansky. I'm of mixed European heritage, and I go by the pronouns she, her. And I'm delighted to welcome you today to this wonderful presentation that we'll be having with my colleagues who are here in the room with me, panelists, on this morning's panel on planetary health transformation amidst the climate crisis. And to start us off, Lisa, if you could please go to the next slide. I'd like to acknowledge that we are joining today from the ancestral lands of the Lekwungen-speaking people, now known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And I'm just so very grateful to have the opportunity to live and learn and work and come together on these beautiful lands and waterways. This is a place where people have come together to gather, to learn, to harvest the bounty of these lands for time immemorial. And it's such a privilege for us to be uninvited guests on these lands. This image behind us, or on the screen in front of you, is an image that Erin will refer back to in a moment. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge the multiple, complex, interconnected, natural ways in which we bring all beings, all elements of the universe together. And this helps to frame some of what we'll be talking about today, and also helps to ground us in our own sense of place and our own place in the cosmos. And so as we prepare for today, with those of you joining online, I'd like to invite you, if you know the lands, the ancestral names of the lands from which you're joining, please go ahead and type those lands, the names, in the chat box now. And for those of you here in the room with me this morning, please just take a moment to tune into your own heritage, your own ancestry, your own lands, and feel your feet on the ground here, feeling gratitude for where we are today and where we've come from, both our own individual beings and our ancestors as well. And without much further ado, I'd like to introduce the panelists here. Today we have Guy Naismith, Erin Dixon, Wanda Krause, and Alec Balashescu, who will be presenting on this vast and beautiful topic. And I'd like to turn it over to you first, Guy, to get us started here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can people hear me? Okay. Thank you. Am I allowed to stand up at all, or I don't want to feel constrained by the chair. Thank you. The topic of planetary health is so important. And interestingly, as Wanda might explain, it hasn't been around for very long, very limited time. And so we need to both understand it and move towards it. And so I'm just going to get us started by taking a systems view of planetary health and what that means. And I feel constrained by the chair. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is Umberto Maturana. The words actually come from Margaret Wheatley, but when she said these words, she was talking about Maturana's work. And if a system is in trouble, it can be restored to health by connecting it to more of itself. To make a system stronger, we need to create stronger relationships. The system is capable of solving its own problems. This is so important because the system, if we look at the system as planetary health, we have to realize that we are part of the system. We are not the stewards of the land. We are not the people who own the land that are taking care of the land. We are the land. We are part of the system. So we need to keep in mind that notion that the system can connect to itself and take care of itself. Next slide. Glenda Oyoung, I have introduced you, those of you in the class, I have introduced you to this before, and I just want to make a point about containers, differences, and exchanges in terms of planetary health. So if we look at the container of planetary health, the way we have been thinking about it, in large part, we've kept the container too small. We need to expand the container to involve more ways of thinking, more ways of being, more ways of doing in the world. as we've explored, that means that there's going to be more differences. And the more differences there are in the way we look at planetary health, the more potential there will be to come up with better, more complete solutions. And the exchanges become more difficult because the exchanges are between people who are thinking about things in different ways, people or non-people. Next slide. Okay. Thank you. I'm really happy that this picture kind of looks a little bit like the picture that Aaron is going to talk about later. We've talked about the notion of infinite games versus finite games, and for those of you online, finite games are the ones we know, the ones we think about. We know the rules, we know the players, we know the object of the game, we know when the game is over, and we know who won. Infinite games different. We don't know who the players are. We don't quite know what the end point of the game is, and we don't know the rules, and when we think we do know the rules, they change. And the point of the infinite game is to stay in the game. So this picture here, this is Myron Rogers. Everywhere in nature, communities of diverse species live together in ways that support both the individual and the entire system. As they spin these systems into existence, new capabilities and talents emerge from the process of being together really quickly. That notion of survival of the fittest is just wrong. What we need to think of is exploring and experimenting with the potential of survival of the fit. If we stay together, working together, we can keep the infinite game going, and we're going to be more likely to come up with solutions. I have one final point to make, so next slide, please. We talked very briefly about entropy the other day in class. Systems tend to move towards entropy. That is to say, no order. That's because entropy doesn't require energy. And so as long as we want to organize, as long as we want to keep people together, keep the planet together, keep people and our non-human brothers and sisters together, we need to organize. We need to have systems that work together. But if we do that, then we owe entropy a fee. And David Christian calls that a complexity tax. The more we want to organize, the more energy it is going to take for us to organize. And yet, that's what we have to do, because we have to expand the container, which means that we're organizing a larger group, which means it's going to take more energy. So we're paying this complexity tax. And I think that that's what we need to do in order to invite different voices into the conversation so that we can have more effective solutions. And I want to hand it over to my sister Erin because she is going to talk a little bit about different voices.
Thank you, Guy, and thank you, Catherine. Tansei Gijagate Indigenous Atupamiziwa Krimeti, Icelandic Isles Kwayendau, Benesi Okaninising Donjaba. I'll say Aki Kwe Donji today. I just introduced myself in Anishinaabe Moan. I grew up in the lands of Anishinaabe peoples, where the Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi peoples. We see Skeleton Lake on the map. It also has another name, another spirit. So I'd like to introduce myself from those waters, Benesi Okaninising. And I'm grateful to be a guest here, but having a very important conversation. And I think anytime we step outside here, we can receive, even when we start to take our breath in the spirit of reciprocity. We're talking about tree breath. As soon as we start to breathe, we start to enter the field of reciprocity, how much we receive from being here in our thinking and our reflections and in the spirit of renewal. So I also wanted to say thank you for allowing us to be in this space here. And for those that are online, we're looking out where we sit into the land, into the forests, into all of creation. And the image from Christy Belcourt, who's a Métis artist, She's spent a lot of her lifetime using art as a way to not only unite people, but to help us think in the ways we are naturally designed. So some things that we move towards that are complex are actually, when we talk about natural or first law, are actually our design. And so there's a complexity and there's a simplicity. And so when we just, when we talk about the interspace and how we start to think together, it really matters because we can become overburdened quite quickly. But when we start to hear other voices and other ways of knowing, we can also become renewed through our humanity and the power of our collective intelligence. And so for me, in my mixed heritage, where I come from and the responsibilities I've been called to, I've realized how much it is about the infinite game, but the capacity for our collective transformation through these times. And how we talk about it, whether it's through prophecy stories, wherever we go across Mother Earth, our ancestral knowledge, we carry stories, visions that are part of our collective wisdom that have the capacity to restore and reframe our pathway forward. And so I remember we were at the World Ethic Forum in Pontresina this year, and there's a lot of young people in Switzerland living very close to the ice fields there. And we were talking about ancestral knowledge in all places this week. And so the young people, as we can hear their cries, it's like that siren that we hear. And when you think about it in community, if you woke up every morning and you heard young people crying out, what would we do? We would stop and listen to their voices. And so all the young people there were almost already at a burnout level from their efforts. When we talk about all these different world forums and global forums for change, and their intelligence and their wisdom in guiding the way forward is very powerful. But what happened? We actually had Otto Scharmer there, and we had a few other people, and people gathered around the young people. And as soon as the young people were connected to the elders and to the other people, we started to think in a very powerful way together. And so for me, that is something I just wanted to center first, is the power of the youth voice. Even when we think about before COVID, if we hear the echo, can we hear the call and response that's happening? When we think about our traditional ways of knowing, we would hear an echo again and again and again. And so when we hear the echo, instead of a point of crisis into a point of planetary health and transformation, it can lift us up. It has a capacity to uplift us all. And I'll just ask Lisa if we can change the slide. Similar to Christy Belcourt, this is Mary Redstar's work, and she works with her daughter Beatrice a lot, and she comes from the Crow tribe. And here you can see an image of Indigenous futurisms. And there's a paradox in the image that I won't point out, but you can imagine that in the sense of Indigenous knowledge and our ancestral knowledge, the colonization of time and imagined futures is such a deep conversation when we think about our capacity for transformation. We can only really touch on some of the points today, but I wanted to bring her image in because here's one person in her family that's doing work globally. We probably don't know who she is. And we need to hear more of those stories. I think in every single community we can go to, close to the mountains, in nations, we can hear different voices, and we need to bring those voices forward. And Dr. Shelley Spiller talked about the interspace, or the space in between that unites all of our voices, that allows us all to come together. And I do feel, as Guy was speaking, systems thinking, living systems thinking, is also a language or a doorway. I'll just talk about a few other things that are moving in the sense of listening to the echo. What are we hearing and what is coming back to us right now to guide us forward? And I don't know if anyone's read the work of Dr. Nicole Redvers. She was listening to the echo within the Lancelet Commission on Planetary Health. In early 2022, she realized there's no Indigenous peoples here in this commission. And here we are again. We have the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. We have all of these efforts, and we're putting out these commissions, uniting universities, moving things forward, and we're still at a loss of our capacity. And so she did something really powerful. She showed, we've been talking this week about the power of process. And so she brought together land defenders, she brought together knowledge keepers, people in universities, different places who were doing that work across globally in places to think, what are some of the determinants of planetary health? And I'll just invite you to look into that work because it's so in-depth, but the process is really important. She said, this is not a finalized theory. We are in a process of transformation. These are some of our systemic markers that we can look towards. And when we think about competencies or capacities that we can reflect on for ourselves. So when you look at it, it's like an earth and it has a spiral in the center. So she talks about Mother Earth level determinants, the interconnecting determinants, and Indigenous peoples determinants because of our history that we've been talking about. Mother Earth level determinants would be like at UBC, they talk about respect for all relations or the rights for nature or the rights. It's about Indigenous people standing for the rights of all creation. And then you have, the reason why I chose this image is the feminine, is the removal of the feminine. And this, for systemic transformation, what we're seeing coming in return. And so you can see that within matriarchal movements, even with Indigenous economics. We have Carol Anna Hinton. We can see it sort of coming from all directions, that return of the feminine and that powerful voice. So if you sort of uncover some of the different determinants, quite interesting. And I also wanted to use this image because one is very simple, like Indigenous elders and children, bringing them back together. There's a lot in there around land sovereignty. It's quite layered, and it doesn't hold anything back, which is important. The truth is really at the center in such a diplomatic way. So that's a really important work. And another person I like to talk about is Dr. Lila June, and she's a Dene woman who just finished her PhD. Very cool. She's also a spoken word artist, singer-songwriter, and she talked about three main themes that she found, and this was mainly looking at land management. So she talks about thinking with nature, which is, these are they might seem quite obvious or simple as opposed to complex. Thinking with nature. She talks about expanding habitat for animals and all creation. She talks about decentering humans, and she talks about designing for perpetuity. We hear Elder Albert Marshall talk about 800 years, how limited we've become in our thinking, when we think about our design and planning. So she talks about it in that way. So if you start to look out, you'll hear the echo coming back of how we can start to think about things from different Indigenous voices from around the world and other voices who might not identify as Indigenous that we don't get to hear. And maybe I'll close with something that's close to my heart is there was a movement, and it started with the First Peoples Wellness Circle, where youth came together to say, how do we promote the life of youth? Because we had such a suicide epidemic here and in many places. And so they talked about 4 patterns, and they designed a toolkit to be awakened in community. One was connection to self, connection to spirit, connection to land, and connection to community. And that's from, of course, we won't talk about that today, but the systemic removal or the cultural genocide is like, how do we actually reconnect in order to step in a way that we're fully here, our gifts are fully here, and we can transform together.
Thank you. Thank you, Erin. And I'm in the spirit of presenting also myself. My name is Alec Bălășescu. I'm here visiting from Romania. I am, if you count only my grandparents, Jewish, Romanian, Roma, and Greek. And I think we can change a little bit the slides, if possible, because I am talking a little bit about artificial intelligence. I'm an anthropologist, so I'm looking at the relationship between humans and technology, another type of relationship, a systemic relationship. And in the spirit of what Erin said before, artificial intelligence is something that we may or may not know what it is. But it's something that we should be aware of because it permeates a lot of thinking and a lot of doing in many societies and in the societies that have a lot of power of decision. So what you have in this picture is also somehow resemblant with the first picture. And I would invite you first to see the resemblances, which is very systemic type of resemblance. You see interconnectedness. You see signifiers of nature, like trees and crops, and also energy. The guy was talking about the need of energy. You see a bicycle there, which points out to an ecological type of life, battery. You see the sun, maybe the moon, a little bit small, but you can see it. And that's to honor the feminine. It should be bigger. And clouds and movements of air. And in the middle, you see artificial intelligence. So the question that we need to ask is how is this picture different from what you've seen before? And one of the things that stand out, at least for me, I'm looking at this artificial intelligence relationship with human beings in the past 10 years, is the artificial intelligence. It's quite in the center there. It's very central and rather dominant. Yeah, the links in the system, they all refer back to it somehow. And we need to be cautious. And a lot of people are cautious. And that's why we have an entire field of artificial intelligence ethics, an entire field of thinking about artificial intelligence in relationships with indigenous philosophies. And I'm thinking of, for example, an indigenous Ubuntu scholar from Harvard who talks about the law and artificial intelligence through Ubuntu philosophy. That's just one small example. And also to be attentive, because in the way we address climate change, one of the propositions that comes in many different ways is to shift our view from being egocentric, putting the human being in the middle, to be ecocentric. My caution is that we become artificial intelligence centric. And we need to understand what this thing is. And if it's not what it is how we use it. It's a tool. It is a tool. It has its own maybe or maybe not consciousness. It's another conversation in the field, and there's no agreement on that. If it has, or if it has the capacity to develop one. But it is something that we created as any other material object. And it's a tool. I don't know if you have kids, but if you give a 4-year-old a hammer, everything becomes a nail. So this is a very powerful hammer. It's a pneumatic hammer. The question is, are we humans bigger than a 4-year-old boy? And I'm saying boy for a reason. The most interesting conversations and critiques of artificial intelligence come from mathematicians, women, coders, who are talking about how the use of artificial intelligence today is done within the paradigm, for example, that organizes time in a very linear way, space in a very flat way, and humans in a very undifferentiated way. So I think there is a lot of work to be done there. I am trying to do just a little bit as to my capacities, and and influence. And I invite you to all think a lot before giving away your power of decision to a machine. Thank you.
Thank you, Alec. And thank you all. Lisa, if we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. Aaron had already mentioned Nicole Redvers. This is to acknowledge this image is also from Nicole Redvers. She's created several frameworks to understand planetary health. And this is one that I chose because it resembles closely a model or framework that I have affinity to and talk through to explain what planetary health is. And what I typically use that covers and incorporates what we've heard so far today is one that's developed by Ken Wilber, which is the ACAL framework within integral theory. And so why I chose this image by Nicole is she uses, as I can understand and see into the image, the same thinking, which if you've listened carefully, we've talked about several capacities. The inner, and so here Nicole centers the inner, which is a little bit different from integral theory's framing. And at the heart, as Alec had mentioned, is the need to decenter something that's mechanistic and rather something that goes more deeply into the self. Because as Guy had also mentioned, all systems are interconnected, and that includes the self in systems. So if we consider the self in systems, as Nicole has done with naming this as the interconnection within nature, the self in systems is actually that interconnection. It's not just this body that we see or that we perceive is our own. We are interconnected with much more within. We're also interconnected with much more without. And so understanding how these two interplay, if we can name these as two anyway, is really important to start. And so she talks a little bit more about the need to focus on caring. And so caring, compassion, what's within, the spirit, as Aaron had also mentioned. Thank you. And seeing that interconnection with what's needed when we consider the Anthropocene and health as the second dimension here. The Anthropocene, as already discussed, is the thinking that we are, as humans, the center of the universe. And when we're talking about planetary health, we cannot think that way. We have to think about humans, non-humans, and not even in that binary because of that interconnection. And if we're thinking about the health of the planet, yes, we need to think about our health, but because we're interdependent, it's the health of all. It's the health of the trees, the plants, the waterways. And so those actually should be, according to Nicole Redvers, centered in our thinking and our planning and our strategies. We're doing the opposite right now. Then she talks about equity and social justice. So if we are thinking about focusing on non-humans, all that we are interdependent with, we also have to think about giving justice, giving rights, acknowledging rights of nature, and doing what's needed to protect the rights of nature. Social justice isn't just about humans. Social justice is about the community, the spirit that binds us and interconnects us. It's thinking a little bit more about our role. We started this morning talking about where we're located. You acknowledged, I think, for those of you who are online, where you're coming from in the chat. Thinking a little bit more about that. Where are we? What justice can we think about that's needed for where we are locally? And as you can see in this framework, Nicole has differentiated the global to the local for good reason, being that we're all interconnected globally. And of course, this is a course about global leadership. But if we are actually going to have traction and create strategies, we must think about those strategies within the local areas on which we are and think about how we're contributing to justice or not. So, what are the learning priorities? The learning priorities from an integral perspective or an integral theory perspective are coming back to the spirit, the compassion, the caring. Those need to be centered in our learning. Those are not external to learning. These really need to be embedded in our education, in what we do, in our planning, in our organizations. What are we doing in terms of action? And so she has what's called, and we already talked about this, movement building and systems change. So what are we doing with the caring? What are we doing with compassion? What are those individual acts? We need to think through what those could be. And as you mentioned, Guy, being much more focused and intentional about what we need to be doing more. I think, Guy, you've covered very beautifully the systems thinking and complexity. What I'll just add to that is we are in very complex, what's called VUCA times. Volatile, complex times that require of us thinking about these interdependent capacities or competencies as interconnected in terms of the macro level. What are those determinants that are impacting the way we navigate these systems? There's an interplay. And so not to forget that there is the global, but we also need to start small within the local. So I hope this gives a little bit of clarity around the competencies and capacities, thinking through where those are located, starting with the self, the spirit, as Erin has mentioned, those interconnections, the actions, and thinking through the macro level systems, the political, economic, social. What are those when we think about capitalism, when we think about politics around the world and locally? Where is equity? Are we listening to those voices? Are we hearing the echo? And how can we be more open to hearing so we may be guided? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much to all four speakers. Let's just take a moment here to acknowledge the energy that's created through your words here. We can applaud. Those of you in the Zoom room, maybe send off a little bit of love or virtual applause. Thank you. We have an opportunity here in this blending of the in-person classroom. We've got a beautiful group of people here in the room. It's so lovely to see you all wrapped with attention as people are speaking. And then all of you joining online, having this opportunity to see in, you get a little window into the classroom experience of this global leadership programming we have here at Royal Roads University. So as we move forward in the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to endeavor to blend a conversation between the people online and the people here in the room. This is hopefully skillfully and wisely engaging the machine, engaging with technology, Alec. But how about what I do to start? Let me just see whether there are any immediate questions here in the room. And while we have the first set of questions running here in the room, I'll invite those of you joining online, if you would like to, you could do one of two things. One is you could type a question in the chat, and I'll ask one of my colleagues, whether Ariana or Niels or Lisa here, We have a whole team of people supporting you in the online room. So you could type your message into the chat, your comment, your question, your observation. Or if you would like, if you'd like to take a little bit of a risk, you could use the hands up or the raise hand feature. If you look on the reactions tab of your Zoom room, for most Zoom setups, there's a sort of a bar along the bottom or the top of your screen that says reactions. You can include a little heart or a smiley face or a thumbs up, or you can raise your hand. So you can use that feature to raise your hand. And then in a moment, I'll return to Ariana and I'll ask if there are any questions coming out of the Zoom room. So I'll give you a moment to sort that out online. And in the meantime, let's turn here to the room. Any immediate observations or questions? We're asking you to think quite deeply. It's still fairly early in the morning in Pacific time, I must say. Those of you online might have had a couple more cups of tea or maybe a few more opportunities to wake up, but it is quite early here. Any questions in the room or observations? What are you sensing as you listen to these four diverse but interconnected voices in terms of your own leadership practice or your own reflection on global leadership, what it means to be a global leader? We have a little bit of silence in the room. Yeah, thank you. So my friend here first, and then one more behind you there. Please go ahead. And I'm going to pass you the microphone so that people online can actually hear you.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. And thinking about systems and human rights and non-human rights, specifically to AI, I just read the news yesterday, like AI could be a human right. What do you think about that? Because it's like it can become to bring us equity or even more inequity. What do you think about that?
Thank you. This is my next class. This is my next course that I'm designing. But I will try to make it short and try to clarify for me your question. You're talking about the rights of AI or the rights of using AI? The access. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, this is not different in any way from access to any technology, access to sanitation, access to clean water, and so on. And so that, for me, it's a kind of no-brainer. However, the question is, to which AI and to what purpose? Again, we are very new in dealing with this technology, and every technology along our histories, we could see that it had brought both positives and negatives. Yeah, the question is not, it's on the one hand access, and on the other hand balancing the positives and the negatives, while thinking in the larger system of climate change. Just one thing, Itzel, do you know how much energy consumes the training of one algorithm? Just the training. Let's express it. Yeah, let's express it in car lifetimes. How many car lifetimes? Yeah, 20 for one algorithm. That we don't think about this because we think of AI as something disembodied and virtual. It's very material and it has a very big impact. So even before talking about rights to access AI, is thinking about what do we need it for and what we don't need it for. Energy, water, sanitation, we need that. But do we need to build immense dams to create energy and cage the rivers? We need to think about that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Alec. I'm sure there are other responses here to the question. I'm going to take one more question, and then if others have something to chime in on the first question, please go ahead in your response. And go ahead now with another question in the room.
Good morning, everyone. And I'm delighted to be here and to see different perspective from the panel, and we are learning a lot from them each and every day. And with this, it's not a question, but it's just a reflection of how we see things of different systems interacting with each other. And this takes me back to one of my study that I was supposed to conduct for the cities on the impact of COVID-19 on the planetary health. So interestingly, I took a different approach about comparing the loss and the gain of the earth. So to my surprise, that I got to know that if we talk about that each action being done by the humans is just for the development, and the only indicator to see the development as per the Nobels is the GDP that we see, that the nation with higher GDPs are more powerful. And to my interest, like the fall of the GDP during the pandemic time was 2.9%, which was way less than the recession of 2008, which is 6.9. And we talk about the life loss during the pandemic was, as of December, it was somewhere around 6.6 million. But as per WHO, that almost 7 million people lost their life due to inhaling, like we say, the exposure to the fine particles in the populated air. So the death during the COVID was less than what it's happening in the business as usual, that people are dying for the polluted air. So to that interest, like I got to know that there's the impact of the COVID. So the interaction of human activities that we said with happening. But on the other side, we have observed another phenomena, that the earth was healing. The average AQI was for the around 20 across the world. We have observed that species coming out, those we consider to be extinct or endangered, moving freely around the world. The air was fine. The clouds were not here. Like it's always the same in this particular land that we are here. But in those cities where we see air pollution I come from New Delhi, and the AQI is always around 400. You cannot imagine in the normal day itself. So the interaction is of like, so that thing that made us to stay at home, and our interaction with the systems of nature, and we restricted it and it healed. So that reminds me, Dr. Wanda's what has explained in this very precise, in a precise manner, that if we restrict or we limit our actions with the nature in a sustainable or in a different perspective, in a local perspective, if Alec has mentioned about building dams, there are other nature-based solutions that we can approach that can help. Or the education system, like if we talk about climate change in big halls with academicians, but if we try to make it at a micro level and imbibe that thing in a simplified manner in the education system at very lower level, so the child can understand what is it. Because if I'm sitting in a in a car and talking that the climate is the temperature is rising, but I'm standing at a red light on a stop and my engine is still on. So we have to think at individual level as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing those reflections and your experience as well. I see there's also a question online, so I'll invite my colleagues to respond. Is there anyone who would like to respond to either of these first two comments and questions in the room? Erin, yes, please go ahead. And then I do see you online. Thank you. I'll come to you in just a moment.
And I'll just be very quick because it's sometimes hidden beneath the surface of what we're talking about. But I think some of my colleagues here are also there, but with Future Earth ones, the communities were trying to understand how to use AI and technology in relationship to planetary health and their rights, even including data, all the way to data and the numerical value. So I remember Eliane Balagero at the time, she was wanting to gather people. So we used the prophecy of the eagle and condor. So we had Santiago was working with them. And so he had community members throughout South America who were trying to understand this, together with Jason Lewis, who's done a lot on Indigenous AI, colleagues here thinking together about it. Having really important, we were talking about conflict yesterday, but very alive conversations. And allowing that and sharing that with policymakers, other people to start to think about it. So convening and creating spaces around that really matters, as you were talking about COVID. And at home, we were doing a lot of work around lake protection on a municipal and township level. And we had one man stand up who works for Canada around air quality and said, you wouldn't believe the extracted industry of gravel and how that impacts youth development in their lungs between this age. And having a field expert that talked about it who could give precise information on the development of children's lungs, also the landscape, the lungs of the land and other pieces. But we had Indigenous perspectives, we had those perspectives all together, and it actually gave enough leverage systemically for our township and municipality to actually traverse the provincial government policies because of the information that they could stand with together. I just wanted to mention that about our process, how we do things, how we gather our voices.
We have a question that will be read from Mark Gottsblom and then a question from Catherine.
Thank you. And I'll invite all of my colleagues to respond to both of those questions. Please go ahead with the first question from Mark.
Hi, everyone. So the question from Mark, can everybody hear me okay, first of all?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Perfect. So Mark asks, any thoughts on how to overcome human nature that is not geared towards a longer term view? For example, being short-sighted. The reality is that systems are all geared towards a short planning, doing, and working cycle. Whiteness in the system, colonial and neoliberalist systems are holding down societies and people pinned down in the current reality. How do we escape this?
Yeah, powerful, complex question. Shall we take two questions at once? Let's take two questions and then the panel can respond to both questions. So I believe somebody with a shared name as me, Catherine, is that right? Is up next? Go ahead.
Hi there. Very good to see you all.
It's a Catherine I know, Catherine Goldman Schuyler. Lovely to see you. Thank you.
Yes. First off, feeling gratitude to you, Catherine, and to all of you for hosting a session like this and making it hybrid that helps us think about such a broad context and formalizing and articulating the larger frameworks about planetary health. I know how new that is, trying to bring it all together. Nonetheless, I'm really interested in what any of you see where either preferably governments or large organizations are already operating from some portion of this kind of context and trying to tread that path towards bringing it into life. I think of the only group that I know of offhand that I think begins to fit this is one called Earth Justice in the United States that has been working to help there be legal challenges to policies that are counter to such planetary health and to support policies that would make it happen. So I just wonder where you see people beginning to give birth to this, in action on the planet. Thank you.
Thank you. Two excellent questions. So acknowledging we have about 10 minutes remaining in the webinar, what I'd like to suggest is that each panelist take just a couple of seconds, couple of moments to respond. And then I'd like to pass the microphone back over to you, Ariana, to say a few more words about the Global Leadership Program as we wrap up today's session. So perhaps I'll start here with you, Guy. And again, we have two questions. The first question from Mark, really, how do we resist this dominant, neoliberal, white colonial nature of short-term vision? And then this more recent question from Catherine around the action. Where are we seeing the action manifest? So over to you, each panelist, to take it from here. Close us off. Thank you.
Very, very quickly. One point about systems that I've made to the class before: every system is perfectly designed to achieve the outcomes that it is achieving. We're part of this global system. We don't get to point at the system and say what the system is doing wrong, because we're part of the system. So if we want to make change, we really need to focus on what we can do individually, even what we can do individually in changing our thinking. And that is critical, because we need to, as Linda Tuhiwe has said, we need to decolonize our thinking. So that's not easy work. That's why we do this whole program. All the courses are focused on exactly that question. So to the first person, well done for the question. And it's not an easy answer. And my only answer, from a very personal perspective to the second question, is as I make the transition from working to building guitars, here is one of the places where that's happening. Over to Erin.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate both questions, because they kind of interweave. There's a lot of, in some places they call them bright spots or wise practices. We were talking about place-based context of stories to give us the wisdom to carry forward. So using those as pathways are really important. And so there are stories. I was thinking about the Conservation Reconciliation Partnership. I'm trying to remember her name. I'm hoping it will come to me, but she sits as a scholar. That emerged out of the biodiversity pathways, again, when Indigenous peoples, I think we're talking about, weren't asked. So they created a report called We Rise Together. Through that, they created 4 research streams that are starting to bring different universities together. I share that because you can see different networks of networks, universities, different things happening. So you can see systems changing, how they're functioning by gathering around something that's happening. But in this one location in Blackfoot country, we were talking about that extends beyond borders, she was looking at biocultural markers around change. So she was looking at language revitalization, looking at justice frameworks, looking at the return of the buffalo, looking at the connection between elders and children. And so you can think about nature-based solutions, indigenous-based nature-based solutions. There's so many different languages that people are using to highlight the bright spots or wise practices. But that framework that Wanda was speaking about, you can actually see people using it very functionally, using it to influence provincial, national, and connecting it with other policies, that they're grounding it. And so we need those stories, and hopefully that will open up our capacity to exist within what feels like a confined sort of outfit that we're wearing of space and place.
Thank you both. Examples are really important to take a look at. And what comes to mind, to answer both your questions, Mark, hello, Mark, welcome back, and Catherine. The thread between both your questions is government, and a whole lot of assumptions and awareness comes to mind very quickly that I think you're grappling with. Examples. So, for example, very recently it was announced that the Malahat First Nation now will be developing a factory not very far off from where we are now located on these lands. that will house energy. And I think it's just an amazing idea of how to action steps towards planetary health. So there's an example there that government might look into to coordinate, to support if needed, and to just gain some broader ideas around the concept of it. This morning I was reading, and I didn't finish the article because it's still early morning, but there's another example in Norway where cars are being reduced, and we're moving into the use of EVs at a very fast pace. So at a very urgently recognized need to transition. If that's the solution, and I'm not advocating that as a solution, but because it's a complex question here with EVs versus other modes. And there's one to at least explore and start questioning. We have just a few minutes, so I'll pass it on to Alec. But what I'll just reiterate very quickly before I do is what Guy already mentioned. I think we must begin with education. We must. And so whether that's within these walls here where we're speaking from, or hybrid, or connecting to government, this is, I think, so central and important. So there's my pitch.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions, Mark and Catherine. They're absolutely interrelated, and minds are changed through practices. As while practicing, you change minds. Here in Railroads University, a lot of us are practitioners, not only teachers, learners, facilitators. And example, in Romania, I'm trying to convince people to plant flowers. But where? Well, we have that complexity tax to pay that the guy is talking before. And that makes us start building all sorts of energy captors, including solar panels that cover fields. So that's where I want to plant flowers. And there are big players in the energy sector that are quite interested. Not only this, but I succeeded to have an alliance with WWF. And the whole process took me about 3 years. And just today in the morning, before coming here, we just hired a biodiversity net gain specialist who would talk about this project to both banks and beneficiaries in terms of 25 to 50 years. It's a start. It's a big step from 2.5 years. Yeah. And that's what I had to report out in terms of example.
Thank you so much. And for those of you in the room, your professors are still here. You will have an opportunity to have ongoing conversations. For those of you online, thank you so much for joining. I'd like to invite Ariana to come online now and just say a few words about the Global Leadership Program. And then I'm going to look around the room, and as Ariana is speaking, I'd like to see some nods, or I'm going to check the facial feedback just to see whether what you're saying, Ariana, is indeed what our colleagues here in the room are experiencing. But please, over to you now, Ariana, to say a few words about the Global Leadership Programming.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I really appreciate that. No pressure. If you're tuning in as somebody who's interested in the Global Leadership Program, we would, of course, love to speak with you. The main email for us is learn.more@royalroads.ca. Of course, this is a life-changing program, like all of our programs at Royal Roads. Nods, hopefully from the room for that. But we would love to chat. So if you have any questions at all, I'll be sending a follow-up shortly after the webinar. So please feel free to respond, or we can put you in touch with some wonderful alumni and students like the folks in the room. So again, thank you so much, everybody, and we hope to see you in the program soon.
So much, Ariana. And so the global leadership programming, we have master's degrees, we have hybrid options that are both online and face-to-face. We have a whole group of people in the room that is coming from perhaps a certificate, perhaps a diploma, perhaps an on-campus version of the Global Leadership Master's degree. There are so many pathways to come into this program. We have a more accelerated program. We have a 2-year program. So please do feel free to reach out. The information should be on your screen now on how to get in touch. Learn more at royalroads.ca, just as Ariana mentioned. It's been a pleasure to be in this room with all of you. I don't have the opportunity to be in this global leadership classroom every day, and so what an honor it is for me to listen in, to have this window of insight into my colleagues and to all of your thinking. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye now.